From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Columbus B. Hill was a pivotal figure in Colorado's culinary history. He was a Black man originally from Missouri, and he was possibly the most popular barbecue chef in Denver in the late 1800s. He served his food to thousands of people. But his legacy wasn't always well cared for. He was buried without a headstone until now. Denver author and barbecue historian Adrian Miller is something of an expert on Columbus B. Hill. He championed Hill's induction into the American Royal Barbecue Hall of Fame last year. And this weekend, he'll honor Hill with a memorial at his burial site in Denver's Riverside Cemetery. He joined me to talk about the best barbecue man in the West and said he remembers becoming fascinated by Hill's story back when he was researching one of his books on food history.
And I found out that this guy was doing next level barbecues throughout the 1800s. So I said, man, I got to find out more about this guy. Now, since my book was on soul food, I knew that I wasn't going to include him in that book. But I thought if I get to barbecue, I'm going to write about this guy. So that's really just me sitting at the microfilm, just looking through issue after issue of the old newspapers.
Yeah, I mean, he had a fair amount of positive newspaper coverage at the time. I imagine that kind of boosted his credibility quite a bit. Was that unusual for an African-American man to receive, praise for his skills in print?
Well, it wasn't unusual for an African-American man to get praised for barbecue skills because that's been happening since the early 1800s. What was unusual is that he's named his full name. He's not called Uncle Columbus, so we get his full name. He's illustrated, so we know what he looks like. And in multiple articles, he's actually interviewed. So that was highly unusual for an African-American of that time period, because usually they were just, a colored man or a Negro man made this barbecue, and that's pretty much all you find out.
How did he get attention as a top barbecue chef early in his career?
Well, barbecue is all about self-promotion. So it didn't hurt that he would call himself, the best barbecuer in the West, that kind of thing. So nothing's changed. We all think this is new nowadays, but that's been going on forever. But
the hype.
Yeah. But, he got asked to host to run some serious barbecues and for thousands of people. So July 4th, 1890, when the cornerstone was being laid for the Colorado State Capitol, he does a barbecue for 25,000 people right in front of the state capitol.
Wow. Give us a sense of what would have been on the menu for a barbecue like this. What kind of food was being served and how much?
So they were doing all kinds of meats. So typically you would have beef, lamb, and pork. But he also added some Southern specialties. So even things called possum. You ever heard of a possum? I
mean, the things that are creeping around in the backyard at night? Yeah.
So yeah, he would even have possum served. And so typically those would be the meats. And then in addition to that, it would just be bread and coffee, maybe some pickles and some other things. But there weren't a lot of side dishes. So the meat was the show. And then if it was in the summer, there would be a lemonade. So as additional beverage. So we're talking, 10,000, 25,000 gallons.
Wow.
Of drinks, 200 whole cattle being barbecued, like 200 pigs, just the scale of the barbecue was just immense.
Yeah, just huge. Well, let's talk briefly about the Independence Day barbecue that you mentioned at the Colorado State Capitol. There was a lot of food being prepared. There were something like 300 waiters to serve the guests.
Typically for these barbecues, they were massive community affairs. And back in the day, the barbecue was free. So you would have notable citizens that would pay for everything and just provide it. So there was speeches by the governor, the mayor, and politicians, everything like that. People smell all that good barbecue happening. And then it was just a free-for-all.
Well, let's talk about another time that people, I think rightfully, kind of flipped out because there wasn't enough barbecue. And this happened in 1898.
Right. So surprise, surprise, the future of the stock show was very much in doubt. So some notable citizens in Denver said, hey, you know what? Let's have a VIP barbecue, really just, roll out the red carpet, show these folks a good time, and then Denver will keep the stock show for years to come. So they decided to have this VIP barbecue intended for 3,000 people, but word got out in Lodo, what we call Lodo now, lower downtown, which was a seedy element. And so as word spread, 30,000 people show up that day.
Oh.
And this is in January, right? January in 1898, when they had the stock show. 30,000 people show up for this barbecue. And there's clearly not enough food to go around. People are smelling it. There's a clamoring. Then somebody gets the bright idea. Hey, maybe if we just give out free beer from Zang Brewery that would chill people out. Now, you
what could possibly go wrong?
Exactly. So there's a full-on riot as people just bum rush the cooks and get as much barbecue as they can. The governor of Colorado, the mayor of Denver get on a grandstand with a bullhorn trying to chill people out. People throw food at them and chase them off the grandstand.
My.
Women and children are weeping. In fact, the next day of the Denver Post, the entire upper fold was in a complete illustration of the barbecue riot in full effect. And I loved it because they just have everybody's throwing down, right? But then in the very corner on the bottom right-hand side, they've got this guy serenely eating his barbecue sandwich with all this mayhem around him. And I just thought that was hilarious.
That's the mark of a great sandwich.
Yep. But this made national news.
Huh,
It was syndicated news across the country talking about Denver's barbecue riot.
I know this was a very heavily publicized event before and after. I cannot imagine that the coverage was favorable for Columbus B. Hill. How effectively was he able to rehabilitate his image after that?
Well, there's a thing. If you're a good cook and if your food speaks for you, you're usually going to make a comeback. Eventually, he does start doing barbecues again for a number of smaller events in the community. Mm-hmm. And then I think his last big event is in the late 1900s, like the early 1900s. He is put on a train to Seattle and he does a barbecue for the Atlantic Fleet, which was making its way around the Panama Canal. And it's a display of America's naval power. But the fact that his reputation was so good that he was still put on a train and brought to Seattle for this. And the Seattle newspapers noted him as an extraordinary barbecuer, one of the best barbecuers in the West.
Adrian, you have made it a mission to try to get the word out about Columbus B. Hill and his contributions to barbecue. What do you most want people to remember him for?
I just wanted them to remember him for his barbecue acumen, so to speak. And then the fact that he represents a whole class of African-American barbecues who were never named or never given the credit that they were due. He is, in his own right, he's a remarkable man who should be celebrated, but I hope that he becomes a symbol of all those underappreciated African-American barbecuers out there. And so the fact that this guy was in our community, I think is really special. So that's why I just took it upon myself to celebrate him, get him into the American Royal Barbecue Hall of Fame, and then, give this brother a proper burial because, he's buried in a place that's unmarked. I mean, how messed up is that?
Yeah. You have had a gravestone made for him. You're planning to dedicate it at a memorial ceremony this weekend. I have to ask you, what does the headstone look like and what does it say?
Yeah, so the headstone, again, he's illustrated, so we know what he looks like. So I found one of the most dignified portraits of him. And so the headstone has that portrait, and then it says Columbus B. Hill and gives his lifespan, 1851 to 1923. And then it says, inducted into the American Royal Barbecue Hall of Fame, one of the great barbecue men of the West.
That's barbecue historian Adrian Miller, author of the book Black Smoke. He says anyone is welcome to attend the dedication of the new grave marker for Columbus B. Hill this Saturday, September 7th at Riverside Cemetery in Denver. We'll have details in our show notes and at KUNC.org. And that's it for us today on In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening.